Okay, guys, today our guest is Dr. Carl Whitcomb. He's president of Lacebark Incorporated, a private research and plant breeding facility near Stillwater. They've celebrated 35 years in business in 2020. Prior to creating Lacebark, he was a professor at the University of Florida and OSU for 19 years. He holds 44 patents, over 30 registered trademarks. He's written 5 books, 4 in the field of horticulture and plant science, and most recently his autobiography, which I have a copy of. He grew up, this is interesting, and then I'll turn it over to him. He grew up on rented farms in Southeast Kansas. After high school, he alternated working as a welder on a traveling construction crew for 15 months, and then attended Kansas State for 9 months, and then back to construction. So it was what, 7 years to get your BS, right? So he knows how to work. So he's traveled extensively, speaks often. He and his wife, Legine, have been married 58 years, have 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. I invited Legine to join us today, but he said she would love to join us, but she's heard it already, so she's not interested. So help us welcome Carl Whitcomb, please.
Well, thank you, Mark. Volume about right like this. Okay. Well, I'm breaking a rule that I started 50 years ago. August of 1972, Legine and I moved to Stillwater. My position was, I will not speak in Stillwater ever. I had been roped into doing a whole bunch of TV shows and radio shows at the University of Florida. And you know what that does? It makes the telephone ring. The old Graham Bell would not make my top 100 list in any way. Now, he had a son-in-law that was spectacular, but no. So Mark asked me, and I thought, well, I've almost made 50 years. Why not break it now? So this is my first talk in Stillwater. I've given talks, all over the country and around the globe, but it's simply because of the phone. I'm to the point at this time, probably the last 5 years, I rarely answer the phone. So if you want to call me, good luck. I don't have a cell phone. I do have an iPad right here. That's as close as I'm getting. So you're dealing with an old timer or someone with old timer, well-established views. I thought I should share with you a couple things as I was just kind of running through what I might say on my mind. And some of the, I don't recognize many faces, Bob and Butch, but not many others. And you probably don't know this face, and you probably never heard of Carl Whitcomb before. And that's the way I planned it. I enjoy my work, I enjoy science, and I can't stand interruptions. That's the other problem with the phone. But you see my handiwork regularly. The beautiful Lacebark elm downtown Stillwater, I gave those to the city in about 1995. They were left over from a big experiment, and you try to sell small something like that, it becomes chaos. I'd rather give them away. And Legine says, well, we've already expensed those anyway, so just get them out of here. The other, a couple of years later, I gave the Stillwater School a group of about 30 trees from part of that research. Most of those got planted north of Mark's office, behind the administration building. That's where those came from. So if you wonder whose fingerprints were on those, I grew them from seed. And you see my handiwork in the summertime with the red Crape Myrtle. I brought along about 50 of these CDs. This Legina and I have two sons. One of them is a zoologist and lives in Northwest Pennsylvania. The other one's a musician and teaches music theory, and I can't define that. I love music, but I mean, he's into music up here, teaches music, how to play cello and music theory and other things at the University of Wisconsin. But they're directors in Lacebark Incorporated and contribute in all sorts of ways. So a few years ago, son Andy, who still works for me part-time, via email, and that's the only way to communicate with me is I like email. But he said, we ought to do something. It's been 30 years. Well, I said, why don't you do something? So he put together a series of pictures and so forth. And a fellow who had been a classmate of Andy's in high school came out, and I did, it's my voice on here. I went through it twice, and then he edited out some hesitations and what have you, and makes me sound pretty good. But then when they got it done, Andy said, well, we need some music with it. So if you listen closely, the music in the background is son Benjamin playing Mendelssohn's Song Without Words, which is my very favorite. So if you want one of these, you're welcome. Or pass one, somebody can't be here or whatever. The other thing that I thought you might be interested in is that, see, I came here in '72 from Florida. About '74, OSU hired a fellow named Dutch Bellinghausen as ground superintendent. Sometime that summer, Dutch came out and several students and I were digging up trees and evaluating root systems, and roots have been a fascination of mine all along. But Dutch says, what are you going to do with those trees? I said, I don't have a plan for them. He said, we need trees on campus. And so every time we'd end up with an experiment with some leftover trees, I'd call Dutch and they'd pick them up, and they're planted all over campus. He said, well, what can I do to help you? Well, at that time, Dutch was over not only the grounds, but the various equipment that was used. Well, I'm an old farm boy. I can weld, I can repair things, I can operate almost any machine. And so if I needed a backhoe on a Friday afternoon, I would pass a note along to Dutch, and it would, backhoe would be waiting there. So, sure beat the shovel. So we had a great relationship until I left at the end of I left OSU at the end of 1985. But about 1983, sometime in that year, I got called into the dean's office, which wasn't unusual, you realize. We're talking to a free spirit that doesn't, I think rules are important, but I consider them advisory. And then I do what I please. And I've always been that way. It's worked so far, and I'm sticking with it. But I was told, why aren't you selling those trees? That money should be coming back to the College of Agriculture. I sat there and listened to him yap, 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 and I didn't say a word. There's no cure for stupid. There's no antidote. But that was one of the number of things that triggered me thinking, I've done about all I can here. I'm gonna go do on my own. And it's worked out great. But when Dutch retired as ground superintendent after I left, at one point I got a letter from him. He said, I thought you might be interested in all the trees you've contributed to OSU over the years. In his accounting, over 500 trees that I had It was part of my research, and the various students had a lot of student help. We contribute to the campus. Then a year ago, in February, I've been working with a novel tree that almost nobody knows, called a heptacodium, native to China, extinct in the wild in China. And my hypothesis is the climate changed and the tree didn't, and it can no longer develop viable seeds. Well, I had figured out a way to germinate the seeds. It takes a bit of trickery, but so I was clearing out a group of trees that I had planted in 2014. They were getting sizable. So I ended up giving OSU 27 trees of this heptacodium. Last year, I gave them another 20 a few weeks ago. And I also gave trees to like the Tulsa Parks Department and Oklahoma City Zoo. And last year we gave away 220 or so. Watch for these trees. Once you get to know them, you say, where can I get one? Well, that's the challenge, because you don't grow them in an ordinary way. Crepe Myrtle are easy. You can take a piece of twig at the right time, drop it on a wet floor and keep the floor wet, and it'll root and try to grow right there. My biggest problem with Crepe Myrtle, and realize at this point in time, I have grown somewhere in the neighborhood of 750,000. And throw the rest, I've saved maybe 50, 80. The rest of them go on the burn pile. I began this whole thing with an interest because the problem with Crepe Myrtle years ago was powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is a fungus disease, and it's a unique fungus disease in that the spores can germinate on the surface of a leaf without free water. And so and you see a white Crepe Myrtle, well, it isn't white by choice. If the leaves are white, it's powdery mildew. Well, let's see, let me get on this. If you came to my office, in the center hallway, there's this map. It's called a Copen Geiger Map. The Germans began collecting information for this map about 1850. It was first published in 1884 to no fanfare. But then about 1918, a whole new focus was put on this map, or the information in this map, on this map. The Reich's plans were pretty broad. So you'd be assigned to go to this point. Here's the crops you're going to grow, and here's the climate. Get with it. Whew. I got this version out of a rare book shop in Berlin a bunch of years ago, and it has proven very, very useful. Here's a close-up of the section of the US. The thumbtack is about where Stillwater is. In my opinion, that the zone called BSK, the prairie zone, should be over east further, certainly to include Stillwater. But you get an idea of the various descriptions. And the other reason I was interested in buying this one, I've never revealed the price. It has both a German legend and an English legend. I've long since lost the German capacity, but you get an idea of a few Crepe Myrtle we have out there in the field. Some of those early years I was growing anywhere from 30 to 80,000, and I've been following information from a couple of German and Polish scientists published in the late 1800s. They said hybrids, true hybrids, are rare. Most of the time, what you end up with are chance seedlings. So when I began this program with Crape Myrtle. I collected seed from one old plant north of the post office before they built that expansion of the police department. Collected all the seeds off that. That was probably a seedling from a fellow over at Okmulgee that was doing work with it way back when. Planted those, great germination, but they all turned white from powdery mildew. And so, but there were, 3 or 4 that had less powdery mildew. So I grew those on, took seed from those. In 4 generations, no more powdery mildew. You selectively go down that road. At this point in time, I was going to show you on here. Yeah. This area where that marker is, that area of China is where Crepe Myrtle is native, extending up toward the North Korean border and extending along the foothills of the Himalayas back over where Burma is. Amazing number of plants that we enjoy that are native to that area, including the Heptacodium that I was just talking about, pearl bush, Rose of Sharon, and on and on and on. And I'm working with about 20 different species, so Crepe Myrtle is just one of those. Come on, what did I do wrong? It zoomed on me, and now it won't forward. Help. You realize I'm not, still doesn't want to. There we go. Okay, there we go. Thank you. But Crepe Myrtle will get to be trees. There are a lot of species of what we call Crepe Myrtle, but only 2 are cold hardy, at least at this point, geography. But we grow the seeds in this pot on the right. Is one of my invention, which stimulates the roots to branch in all direction. We plant those things out in rows, make a dibble hole in the row wherever there's an emitter, drop a plant in the hole, step on the side of the hole, turn on the water. We rarely lose a plant. I walk those rows at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, depending on what I'm seeing, watching the plants. 2 pests, harvester ants, will graze those young plants off to the ground and kill them. But interestingly enough, the other critter are tomato hornworms. What tomato hornworms see in Crepe Myrtle, I have not a clue. But every now and then you'll see one partly defoliated, and they're so easy to spot. You just step on those. You don't have to spray for those. But so you get an idea of the number of plants out there in the field. And in 1996, I introduced a plant patented and trademarked the name Dynamite for the first Crepe Myrtle with true red flowers. They're very pinks and lavenders and whites, but none had true red flowers. In fact, on this CD, on the back of there is a quote from 2 scientists with the National Arboretum who had done extensive research trying to sort out the pigments. And their conclusion was there won't be one with true red flowers. It isn't possible. Well, it is possible. And since that time, there are lots of them with true red flowers. The other thing about genetic resistance, true genetic resistance, look at the plant in the center of that photograph. That's white. That's powdery mildew. And yet the plant on either side has 0. That's about as extreme pressure as you can get as far as a pathogen goes. But there you see the little plants just a few inches tall versus 4-year-old plants. So typically we plant out 1 year, 2nd year, 3rd year, the 4th year, they're toast. I take them out, they go on the burn pile. Anything I want to save, I have a small tree spade on an articulated tractor, and I move. Like last year, I saved 4 out of about 4,000. Pretty selective. This is then came up. This came up about, oh gosh, well, the year doesn't matter. Look at the one plant that has round seed balls, seed capsules. The other one has none. And you say, wow. There's a distinct peck order in terms of distribution of energy within the plant. And it goes flowers, fruits, leaves, stems, and roots. Roots at the bottom of the phalanx, end of the phalanx. Flowers and fruits. If you don't reproduce the species, you're not going to be around very long, and you'll be another dinosaur. So the focus is there. But on the other hand, what I was observing over the period of time is that the plants that produce the fewest fewest seeds, not the fewest flowers, but the fewest seeds, the flowers stay attractive longer. And I was thinking, oh, but this was my first breakthrough of finding a plant that produced lots of flowers but no seeds. When I find a plant out in the field, I'll mark it. At the proper time in the spring, I'll take 10 cuttings off of it, stick them in a tray and under mist in the greenhouse, and they virtually all root 90 to 100%. I pot up 9 of them in containers and watch them. And most of those will flunk out before the end of the growing season for one reason or another. But then the few that I save, then I'll grow a second year in a 3-gallon container. And I only grow in these containers that I design, because if you look at that root system on that Crape Myrtle, there are no circling roots. Every root gets guided into an opening where the tip of the root is dehydrated by air, and it makes it branch. Big plus versus the old wrapping story we've all seen. This was actually the first plant I put on the market. It's Raspberry Sunday is the name. None of the literature mentions fragrance in Crepe Monks. This rascal is fragrant. And it's sterile. Doesn't produce any seeds. But to bloom a second time, it has to produce another panicle. So it only blooms about 3 times during the summertime. That's not good enough. This would be a big, nice plant. This is Dynamite, the first true red one. Isn't that pretty? Wow, you just say, where can I get some more of those? And they're worldwide. In fact, one of the other stories, don't let me rattle on too long, but in 1999 or 2000, my phone rang one day and I happened to be in the office and answered it. It was a person with the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. They wanted to come to Stillwater and negotiate how to get Dynamite equipment. They wanted them for the 2008 Olympics. So we worked out a deal. It took them about 1.5 years or 2 years, almost 2 years. But what I wanted was a kilo of seed from native Crape Myrtle up near the North Korean border, hoping that from that population, I could get plants more cold tolerant for us. Instead of being Stillwater, kind of the northern zone, maybe I could move it ways further. Well, I finally got the seeds. There wasn't a plant in the whole lot that was any good. But anyway, Dynamite got some good show at the 2008 Olympics. But it's just a spectacular plant. This is one called Red Rocket that's the same color red, even though the picture doesn't really show it, on the south side of Tiger Grove. Every summer it shows off if you happen to drive by 9th Street. Let's go on down here. And they start flowering. They flower on new growth. So if you take a cutting and root it, even though it's 6 inches tall, it'll flower. I mean, it doesn't have to wait for that physiological development. Oh, yeah, here's the picture I was looking for. The plants on the one side that are flowering are seedlings that I've been working with. The plants on the left side are some of those seeds from China. I mean, and mildew anyway, maybe, and who knows where the seed came from. But this is a dwarf I named Tightwad. 10 years old and it's about 4 feet tall. You don't want a big Crepe Monks, you don't have to grow one. This pink one shows the feature that came about 12, 14 years ago. If you look at this, these panicles are on the same plant. On the one side are flowers with a few flower buds left open at the top. And then here's another panicle with lots of buds that's not open yet. By the time the flowers drop, age and drop, the one that doesn't have flowers yet will be in full bloom. By the time those age and drop, the one that has flowers now will be back in full bloom again. That was a total surprise. And if you want to know how I did it, I don't know. It occurred. And I have been able to follow that with other species, other cultivars as well. This is one I named Rhapsody in Pink. It will be in bloom 2 weeks before any other Crape Myrtle anywhere, because it doesn't need much heat to trigger the onset of flowering. It'll bloom continuously for at least 100 days. No flowers and wait, and flowers and wait. No, it just puts on that continuous show all summer long. That was phenomenal. This is another sterile one that I named Double Feature. Double Features are ruby red. The flower panicles are not as big, but it produces multi of them. This is actually my favorite. This is one I call Double Dynamite. It's as red as the original Dynamite. But now these, everything has a trade-off of some sort. If you want a plant that gets tall, you want to screen your neighbor or whatever, this is not the plant to do it. It'll put on about 10 to 12 inches of new growth in the spring, beautiful wine foliage. But once it starts flowering, it spends all its energy flowering, and no new growth occurs all the rest of the season. It stays very nice and tidy. Beautiful specimen. Double Dynamite. These are all on the markets now. I've got some new ones that will come later. But the whole screening process plays a big role in this. And so I get a lot of good exercise out walking those rows and looking and putting markers on plants. I've now come to realize, Butch, that I use aluminum labels that are about 3 inches. I have to tie them on both ends. The blasted deer, if it's dangling, they'll bite it off and spit it on the ground. But in the meantime, their teeth marks make it to where it's hard to read what you'd written on there. But if I tie them twice where it doesn't wiggle, deer are a major problem. If I could let, you've heard of mad cow disease. I've got a standing order for 50 gallons of mad cow disease. I'd spray the whole farm and kill every deer out there if I could. My two big problems are deer and beaver. The beaver come out of the creek and say, I want that tree. You can't put water around every darn one of them, and you can only trap so many beaver. But anyway, that's a problem. Take a look at the picture here. On the one hand, it's a lavender, typical, pretty much Crepe Myrtle. On the other hand, there's no flowers yet, but thick and bushy. A typical Crepe Myrtle season would have anywhere from 3 to 5, sometimes even 6 stems coming out of that original plump crown. Those dense ones will have 40 or 50 stems. Multiple. Look in between those. What we used to think was a normal plant on one side and the other, and yet here's this thing that looks like a holly or a chrysanthemum. In fact, in my notes, that's how I note these dwarfs that have come along. I now have about 100 of those dwarfs. I refer to them as Crepe Monks. They're Crape Myrtle, but they grow like a garden. Color, foliage, size, shape, a lot of variation, but they all have that multiple stem coming from the crown feature. I observed the first ones of these about 7 years ago. I now have over 100 of those various dwarf ones, and I've transplanted them out to one row. None of them have flowered yet, but last summer, about 10 branches on one side, beautiful red flowers, but none on this. There's 4 of them planted out there. You can bet I'm going to take cuttings off of those 8 branches, 4 or 8 branches, to see what happens. And once you ever break through that, that'll be exciting. Then you have a Crepe Myrtle, and hopefully they'll be sterile, so they'll rebloom. A Crepe Myrtle of a size and shape that fits into a lot of settings that don't at the present time. This one does have some cool places. That deck is outside, on the south side of my son's house in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. It's a decent pink that produces seeds. I'll never do anything else with it, but I've been following those seeds from that plant and watching. If you ever get a Crepe Myrtle, some of your Crepe Myrtle colored ones that look like this, somebody sprayed ground with it. If I take the seed off of a red flowered Crepe Myrtle before the flower, the bud, before it opens, and pop it open, it's pure white inside. The pigment doesn't develop until 6 weeks of summer. Roundup, even the faintest hint of Roundup, inhibits that pigment development. So you end up with all these other experiments that you have to do to sort these things out. All right. Okay. Oh, I'm doing better than I thought. Let's back up a minute. That's the bit that I'd prepared, and apparently time-wise worked out reasonably well. A reminder, if you want to have a question you want to ask and not here, you can email me, carl@lacebarkinc.com. I answer most emails. It may take me who knows how long, but email is my favorite way. I do have a bit of a hearing problem, and that has further reduced the emphasis of using the phone for anything. But if you have a question right now, sure.
You're ready now?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably, I don't know, 12 years old or so. It's all in black and white. Is there a color version that's been produced since then, or do you plan on one?
I don't plan to. That would be a challenge beyond what I care to do. You reach a point where you say, what do I really like to do? What things do I not like to do? Right? And you know the number of days you get to enjoy is not infinite out there. Well, at age 82, I still do anything I want to as long as I care to. No physical limitations, no replacement knees. And that, and I think about that, and I've shared that with various people. It probably goes back to the fact that I was the littlest kid in every grade, first grade through high school. Sports, not that clumsy kid. You won't choose him. So I didn't have any sports injuries, which at this time in my life, I think, wow, no knee problem, ankle problem, back problem. I can dance down the road if I want to, jog down the road, whatever. But no, it won't be in color. It takes too much work. It is literally what, you have no idea how many hours it took to get the pictures that are in there. The pictures with people or vehicles date everything. So trying to find a picture of the plant without either of those in it, that was a chore. And invariably, there's, I'd get the pictures back and darn, I didn't see that car back over there. Well, anyway, someone else have a question? If not,
Thank you so much for all your